Okay, I think we're at a moment where we can slowly start. So, once again, welcome. My name is Patrick Berus. I am the head of communications at Instrat think tank. Uh, Together with me today, I have Marta Frystacki of Open Energy Transition, Oleksiy Mikhailenko of Clean Energy Lab, and Michał Hetmański, also of Instrat. The agenda for today is that firstly, Michał is going to introduce you to the premises of the study itself. Then Marta will walk you through the methodology of our modeling. And then, last but not least, Oleksiy is going to present the findings of the study. Afterwards, we've reserved half an hour for a Q&A session. And you're probably wondering how that is going to look like. So when you see your Zoom panel on the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button over there. You can ask questions by using this section throughout the whole webinar. I encourage you to do that as early as possible. We will answer those questions at the very end of the webinar during the Q&A session. You can also use the chat to let us know about anything that you'd like. But for questions, please use the Q&A session. For your information, this webinar is recorded. We will be posting it on our YouTube channel later on. And about the report itself, it is going to be public on Instrat's website after we finish the webinar. So without further ado, I think I'm gonna give the mic to Michał and let him start with the presentation.
Great, thank you very much. That's my pleasure to host. I already see more than 30 people in this virtual room. My name is Michał Hetmański. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Instrat, Warsaw-based think tank with a mission of supercharging policies with open data and research. Together with me, we have Oleksiy from Clean Energy Lab and Marta Frystacki from Open Energy Transition. Will introduce themselves, but just to very briefly introduce why Instrat is dealing with this challenge, foremostly because of the tremendous exercise in the power system reconstruction and on-spot maintenance amid Russian bombardments and attacks. And based on our more than 5-year experience in modeling Poland's energy transition, and also a pretty challenging pathway of transition from fossil fuel generation coal towards clean and renewable energy sources, we wanted to help empower Ukrainian decision makers and international community about this process, based also on Poland's experience in managing the not always healthy growth of different technologies in the mix. So I leave it now to Oleksiy to go to the premises of this study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michał, for his introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Oleksiy Mikhailenko. I'm co-founder of Clean Energy Lab and head of analytics in there. Shortly on why we decided to do what we've done. So, of course, we all know that Ukraine is under full-scale attack on its energy system. As of mid-2024, around 60% of its generation capacity has been destroyed, occupied, or damaged to a certain degree. And now Ukrainian government is prioritizing the energy security at most and is trying to look at how to build the decentralized energy system. The private investment in this environment is quite constrained and hampered by regulatory risks. But at the same time, there is an opportunity rising since energy prices are rising and PV panels are as cheap as ever. So we identify the potentials of behind the meter generation, and that can craft the future of the decentralized system. And we wanted to investigate what is possible to do in the Ukrainian power system. How can we address its risks that is currently before us. So our study is focusing on the short and midterm actions. So we're looking into immediate needs by 2026 to close the power shortage. We're exploring pathways to 2030 based on several scenarios, which hasn't been done previously. More on that later. We'll be focusing on commercially available technologies only. We pay special attention to the effects of behind-the-meter prosumer-driven solar photovoltaics and how far we can go with deploying that. And of course, we'll be looking into policy considerations for energy sector of Ukraine. And yeah, we couldn't do that without our great modeling team. I pass to Marta to present the modeling approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexei. Yeah, my name is Martha. I'm co-founder and head of energy system modeling at Open Energy Transition. And today I want to walk you through the modeling approach, just very briefly, focusing especially on this behind the meter modeling approach, because this is the key part of the study. So this is the model that we were using at a relatively high spatial granularity for the Ukrainian system, where you can see different technologies within each node already. And you can also see that we also model the neighboring countries as potential importers or exporters, where we set the import and electricity prices exogenously, so the model can import or export depending on the endogenously determined prices within the Ukrainian system. On the next slide, we will see that only the electricity demands are set by the modeler. So only the electric devices, whereas everything else, like the grids and storage and the energy sources, are modeled endogenously. So the model decides which technologies to build, except for the existing ones, which we add also as the modelers. And that accounts for different constraints, like the availability of renewable resources, the ramping limits of conventionals, as well as the maintenance schedules, as well as self-consumption and efficiencies of the power plants. But we also account for energy losses when we, for instance, store electricity. The whole model is a minimum total system costs optimization model that accounts for both investments in new technologies, but also for the operations of the existing ones, accounting for fuel costs, maintenance costs, dispatch, and the power flow. And of course, the investments also account for mostly the investments costs in generation and storage technologies. It's a whole optimization, so both is optimized in the same time. In this study, we didn't allow transmission expansion, but it's theoretically possible to do that in pipes as well. To focus a little bit how we model this behind the meter approach, I wanted to briefly at a high level explain how this is done. So each of the nodes you have seen in the previous slide is basically accounts for the electricity where demand and storage is added. So if you click Alexei once, you can see that there is the generators and the demand and storage are added directly within the electricity bus, so to say, which represents the carrier. And then if you again click, you can see how the power plants are added, like coal, oil, uranium, gas, and methane. They can supply electricity. So here we have the conversion losses to electricity. But then this is only at the high level node or high voltage node. And if you click again, you will see how this connects to the low voltage grid for the distributions. So there's basically somehow a link that accounts for the costs to go from the high voltage to the low voltage node. You will see on the next slide that electricity is added at the low voltage node. Again, one more. And that the costs for the distribution grids are assumed at the distribution grid, for instance, in this case. So that's how we model behind the meter. And that's really the key novelty probably for modeling the Ukrainian system.
Thank you, Martin. I will be picking up from here and going into a bit more details. So indeed, that was one of the key novelties. But not the only one. So the way we build our scenarios is based, first of all, on how we approach the demand. The standard approach for all the modelings that we saw in the last 2 years was to look into one baseline power demand in the future. We decided to introduce another one, which we called a frontline approach, a frontline pathway, which represents the power demand which will be present in Ukraine if the current situation on the front line remains within the front line, and will represent the constrained Ukraine's economy. While victory scenario represents return of full control over Ukrainian territories, including Crimea, and the demand will represent the whole country. At the same time, we're looking into different scenarios for the supply part, which also represents different approaches. The repair one is based on the assumption that those power plants that were damaged will be repaired to some extent. Those unoccupied territories will not be available and they will be considered destroyed. And the decentralized supply scenario represents full renovation of the power system without repairing old coal and destroyed coal power plants. We'll also be modeling to some sensitivity scenarios, and we'll talk about those on the later slides. And of course, there'll be a 2026 scenario that we'll be looking for immediate needs. Another novelty was the demand modeling. So instead of just picking an exogenous figure, we built our own Excel-based model to represent the changes in regional level of demand. So we tried to capture the changes in economic activity and destroyed economic assets in different regions. So our model captures all these differences in time. So the result of this model is then fed to our power system pipes model that Mark will describe. Our findings is that total demand for victory pathway will reach the pre-war level, but this represents whole liberated territories. So it captures the effect of destroyed industry around the eastern and southern Ukraine. While frontline scenario envisages only 121 terawatt hour, which is lower than before war. So the key difference is that most of national plans and strategy plans and action plans are based on high demand, which is in our opinion is going to be only if we achieve the victory in full control over territories. While we might be looking into a lower demand figure, and these might inform the government on the extent of investment that is required and maybe adjust some of the actions. Another big novelty, of course, was the behind the meter solar estimation. So we tried to project the baseline trajectory for deployment on behind the meter, presumed driven duration. Why is it important? Behind the meter generation is on the distribution level on the side of consumer, so it effectively decreases demand if you're looking at the system as a system operator. So it is important for the system operator to understand how much of those energy assets are there, because simply we cannot control them. You cannot curtail them. You cannot turn them off from the dispatch center. So it's really important to accommodate those into the modeling and not to model them the same as other assets or the same as other PV technology. And we believe that behind the meter solar will represent the majority of added solar capacity in Ukraine due to 4 big factors. First of all, we've achieved cost parity or behind the meter generation against retail electricity tariffs, especially for commercial and industrial consumers. It's still a narrow margin for households, but with with further changes in regulated household tariff is going to be a big factor as well. Introduction of net billing scheme for consumers is going to be a big driver. It's been recently introduced in Ukraine. Programs with subsidized loans has been a really good incentive as well. And of course, demand for emergency supply source will drive the demand for prosumer solar as well. Baseline assumption in the National Renewable Energy Action Plan was 5,000 megawatts by 2030 installed in Ukraine. We can version the same number for households as well, but we think that is going to be 2.5 gigawatts more represented by commercial industrial consumers. And these were our baseline inputs into the model. So let's dive straight into the findings of our modeling. So first of all, by 2026, Ukraine would need 5.4 gigawatts of new capacities, represented mostly by renewables, PV in particular. And we think that behind the meter could play the dominant role there. So we can see that around almost 2 gigawatts of solar can be deployed on prosumer side, whereas 1.6 on utility scale. What's also important is we would need additional flexible generation, around 1.1 gigawatts of gas generation distributed across the country. This, of course, stems from our baseline assumption on how much of power plants will be repaired. You can see it on the graph. Around 2.8 gigawatts of capacity needs to be repaired. All the repairs assumptions were talked through with industry experts during our work. So this represents more or less a consensus of our expectation how much could be repaired in a short time. And out of that, this effort in the next 2 years will require mobilization of 4.3 billion euros. So that's an enormous effort that Ukraine needs to undertake in a record time. By 2030, the power system may look like that. Let's dive into this slide a bit more. So we can see on the left side, this is the total installed capacity, how the system will look like under different pathways and scenarios we looked in. I remind you, victory represents the whole Ukraine. Frontline represents demand within the current frontline. And repair scenario is the one where we bank on repairing coal assets and make them work for a bit longer until 2030 at least. While decentralized scenario, this is the one that we run assuming we were not repairing coal, but rather replacing it with new decentralized gas generation spread out across country. So it won't be huge gigawatt class power plants, rather than distributed small plants that provide more security and resilience to military attacks. So the key outtakes from this slider, from this pinnacle of the modeling, we would need 10 less gigawatt of capacity if we remain in the frontline pathway. So it means way less investment and also a bit different structural investment. Compared to victory, we won't be needing that much of solar. So if solar is driven by behind the meter deployment, we'll probably do not need any utility scale solar deployed in Ukraine. That's one of the key messages. So we would rather focus on developing wind rather than utility scale PV. And looking into the market, behind the meter PV has better economics because behind the meter is avoiding grid charges, while utility scale is going to be more challenging to deploy due to decrease in capture prices, decreasing prices during the solar peaks. Another key outtake is we can replace 7 gigawatts of old coal with around 5.3 gigawatts of gas in a fully decentralized system. And such system, switching from gas to coal, will give us more flexibility in the system that would allow to integrate more wind energy. You can see that the difference in new capacities that can be added rises from 4.4 gigawatts to 7.5 in Victory, and from 3.4 to 5.2 in Frontline Pathway. That's to integrate renewables, we would need to switch to more flexibility, and that's there is unfortunately no way around it. Please notice that we also model the baseload nuclear generation at the levels that probably we should mention how it compared to other modelings. So in a frontline scenario, we don't assume Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station to be under control. It still remains out of the system. While for our Victory scenario, we assume that not the whole 6 gigawatt of its capacity is available, but rather only 2 blocks out of that are available. This stems from our assumptions on availability of water for cooling, because Kakhovsky reservoir is destroyed, unfortunately, and the power plant will probably be looted and mined, so it will take several years just to get it back on track. So our assumption on nuclear baseload is conservative, which allows us to integrate more renewables and more space for new gas generation. Now, the role behind the meter. We think that around 7.5 gigawatts of behind the meter can be easily absorbed by the Ukrainian power system without any changes to nuclear baseload profile, and without any curtailment for the existing renewable sources. So it's going to be an optimal mix, which underlines the potential role of behind the meter PV that it can play in a power system. We also try to investigate the theoretical limit. So basically, what will be the maximum capacity that the system can absorb without breaking its standard dispatch patterns, without intervening with nuclear baseload, and without bringing more costs. Our model identifies that around 15.8 gigawatts is the theoretical limit, but this comes at a cost. So coal plants will remain idle for almost 1/5 of the time of the year, and it also leads to a very significant 20% curtailment of utility scale wind and solar plants. And it will only gain us 1 mere percentage point of renewable share in the mix at a 27% high investment cost. So bottom line, it won't be economical to push maximum amount of prosumer PV, but rather follow the cost optimal path of around 7.5 gigawatts. This would inform the government on how much of PV behind the meter PV do you really want to be in the system by 2030. Of course, the change in the power mix with more renewables comes with increased demand for flexibility. We try to estimate that, one, to inform the government and the system operator. So system maximum ramping requirements is measured in gigawatts per hour, basically how much of speed and power you need to go from hour 1 to hour 2, either upwards or downwards, reducing the load. And it's going to be a really dramatic change, almost 6 times demand compared to 2021 in a Victory scenario, and slightly less in Frontline scenario. This will create the so-called duck curve in Ukraine. Is going to be more pronounced. On the right side, you can see the graph which represents this this change and how the dark curve can be absorbed. What is the limit of flexibility in our power system? So the black dotted line is the demand in a given day. You can see that behind the meter solar reduces the load around to around 10 gigawatts from almost 16. But the remaining part of the renewables can push the net demand below baseload. And the way the Ukrainian power system can sustain that without turning off its nuclear baseload is utilizing its downward flexibility, which is mostly represented by existing pumped hydro stations and export capacity. So these are paramount to absorb the amount of renewables that we modeled. And you can see that if there is, for example, no export capacities available, either for technical reasons or because of the price signals or about the regulatory limitations, we won't be able to integrate up to 2 gigawatts of renewable output. And the same goes for pumped hydro stations. The important part about Ukrainian pumped hydro stations right now is that they are already at the maximum of its volume. So export will be the crucial enabler of the flexibility. There is no opportunity to increase pumped hydro storage in the short term. Again, we're looking at only until 2030. So yeah, export will be a crucial enabler in the short term for integrating renewables. Now to the costs. Of course, rebuilding the power system is more expensive than repairing old coal power plants, and it brings almost 50% more capital cost compared to baseline assumptions. However, we call it a security premium because rebuilding the power system with more renewables and more decentralized gas generation also makes it more resilient to military attacks. So yes, it will cost us more, but eventually it's what you have to pay if you need to put a price on security of energy supply. That's going to be a ballpark figure, and it only covers the generation side. We did not accounted for repairs of grids. Now, another sensitivity scenario that we run was an impact of additional nuclear baseload. So we've been following the conversations around developing new nuclear generation in Khmelnytskaya nuclear power station. There were even talks about expanding another one. Of course, honestly, we doubt that these plans can be realized before 2030. But even if so, we decided to run a sensitivity analysis to show what would be the potential impact of this new 2 gigawatts of nuclear baseload on the power system. And compared to our baseline scenario with repairs, we saw that 2 gigawatts of nuclear will substitute around 1.5 solar and 1.4 gigawatts of wind in the victory, and will also crowd out 0.6 gigawatts of wind in the front line. It could also lead to more renewables curtailment. So adding more nuclear will push even the existing power plants already out of its maximum output. Of course, it will also help to reduce fossil generation. So it will crowd out a bit of half-peak energy provided by coal, but it will also reduce the renewable share significantly. And the last and foremost, to be economically viable option, the additional 2 gigawatts of nuclear capacity would need to cost less than 1.6 billion under the victory pathway and less than 0.6 billion under the frontline pathway to make any economic sense. So yeah, our vision here is putting more nuclear baseload in this short term is quite risky and is probably not worth the shot. It's going to cost way more than it can be achieved with with a different type of system. We also looked at the renewables targets and compared them to government's plans. The recent government plans were quite ambitious in terms of renewable targets, and our repair scenario, which is sort of consistent with government's plans regarding the capacities installed, showed that the power system can achieve even slightly higher renewable shares that envisaged by the government modeling. We can go above 30% of the target. However, if the government proceeds with nuclear plans of adding these 2 gigawatts of nuclear capacity, meeting a renewables target would be challenging, honestly. And our decentralized scenario with replacing coal with new gas, flexible generation, is mostly consistent with NECP's National Energy and Climate Modeling scenario, the ambitious one. And yeah, it gives us the most ambitious renewables targets by 2030, reaching up to 38%. Right. These were the insights, and what does it mean for Ukraine? What can we do to achieve the modeled vision? So first and foremost, we need to rebuild trust in the government support. So as most of you know, Ukraine has accumulated lots of debts to renewable energy investors in the last years. It now reached 30 billion hryvnia, so around 0.75 billion euros. 750 million euros. And this is one of the biggest barrier for investors in the market. It's really hard to develop merchant-only project without any support, and there is no trust in government support. So, but without government support, without the subsidies, barely any country honestly can sustain this high development rate of new power plants. So, yeah, first and foremost, the government should really make a political decision and honor its obligations, and also provide a long-term visibility for its commitment. So we suggest to start publishing 5-year forecast of transmission tariffs with renewable support allocated, and to acknowledge and accommodate the renewable auctions quotas that we suggest to publish, and to follow procurement in this forecasts. And in terms of renewables auctions, it's one of the main policies that could drive the utility scale generation. We've estimated what could be the renewable energy quotas for the next 5 years to accommodate the capacities that we modeled in our scenarios. And you can see it in the table on the left side. The difference between wind 2 years and wind 3 years is assuming the stage of development of the wind projects. We've consulted with Ukrainian Wind Energy Association, and they shared the data that about 4.8 gigawatts of projects in the pipeline currently present, of which we estimate around 1.2 to be realistically installed by the end of 2026. So there is a huge pipeline that can be tapped into and enabled, and auctions can be the main drivers for that. And the renewable quotas should be big enough. So we recently seen the pilot auctions for solar and biomass and small hydro in Ukraine. Those were unfortunately not a good result. Solar did not procure any, and there was a 2 megawatts of small hydro procured, and we are about to witness the wind auction in the next couple of days. Again, the quotas in the pilot auctions were too small, and we think we need to at least multiply it by 10 in the next couple of years and go with a big procurement if we want to deliver the new power capacities and address the power shortages. Next policy recommendation is changes to the balancing market. As we mentioned, there is a lot of gas capacity that we need in both decentralized approach or repair scenario, but you can't push any flexible asset into the market without robust revenue stream. And the balancing market is also under that problem. There is also around 30 billion hryvnias of debt accumulated. And to unlock the investment, we also need a package of reforms that will include these: addressing the debt issue and actually looking into how the debt origination and stop the system bleeding. So we need to disconnect non-payers and provide funding to companies that you cannot disconnect, but they can still cannot pay electricity bills. We would suggest increasing price caps to improve economics of flexible generation and battery storages. As you probably noticed, our model doesn't suggest to build utility scale batteries because the economics are not quite there. So you would need a really robust market to provide more revenues than it could be just captured in just a wholesale market. We suggest introducing capacity markets. That could be a strong incentive for new generation, and also to look into the recently announced auction parameters. This is something that resembles capacity market in Ukraine, but it's not quite there. The government has announced that it wants to procure 700 megawatts of new gas generation, but we identify that the auction parameters and especially the starting price is a bit high. So we suggest to tweak it, change it for a more cost efficient outcome. Now, of course, as we identified behind the meter PV as one of the key drivers for the growth and the deployment of new generation, we suggest doubling down on its support and prioritize behind the meter PV over utility scale because it has better economics and it has more potential around the country. And most of it, you can, by supporting behind the meter prosumer generation, you can activate and enroll more agents, more people, more legal entities, more companies into the process. So it's going to be both a diversification of the risk and also you're tapping into a wider sources of funding. The more people participate in the energy system, the faster you can deploy it and the more resilient it could be. We think that the subsidized loan programs that are already established are a good start, but we would need to ensure the stable financing for those programs. And we try to estimate the ballpark subsidy that is required to be covered from the state budget each year based on our projections on behind the meter solar, assuming it's all going to be supported by the subsidized loans. So we would need around 24 billion hryvnias in the next after 6 years to finance that, or almost half a billion euro. We also suggest introducing grants to reduce upfront costs, especially for the systems with residential batteries. There's still quite a significant investment. But yeah, reducing upfront cost could also reduce the levelized cost of such systems, making them more tradable in the market. And of course, we would need a promotional campaign to popularize the decentralized new generation. Ukrainian government should really involve as many people into the campaign of becoming energy independent as possible. Now, with the growing share and the growing capacity of behind-the-meter installations, it's really crucial to them to be visible for the system operator. It's crucial for system planning, day-to-day planning of balancing processes and efficient dispatch. So we argue that we would need to establish a regular data collection, obliging distribution system operators to proactively identify non-reported behind-the-meter generation. These are the cases that cover companies and residential houses that could have installed their systems but did not report to the grid operator, or they don't feed the power back to the grid. They use it only for self-consumption. It's still a black box. We don't really know how many of them, and it will be really crucial to understand the extent of those capacities, especially going further into the future. We suggest also providing incentives for self-reporting that capacity. So make people know that notifying authorities that they have the power solar panels installed benefits them. For example, the guarantees of origin has been already introduced in Ukraine, and they're guaranteed to be issued to any renewable energy producer, even if the power system, even if power was not fed to the grid. So we need to inform consumers about this opportunity and make them, before they can get guarantees of origin, they should report their power systems installed and update system operators on the changes. And of course, another party involved are the installators, the company that installed the systems around the country. We think that introducing reports that are coming from them as well on the number of installations is also important source to cross-check the data. Ukraine has also recently introduced legislation on the aggregation. Aggregation is a business that combines small distributed assets into a sort of virtual power plant and enables small assets that wouldn't be participating in the wholesale markets before to actually gain value from that. And why aggregation is important is because behind the meter generation, as we mentioned before, especially PV, is not curtailable. You cannot manage the power system by sending signals to thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of prosumers. You cannot control them in real time. While aggregators can actually provide that interface between system operator and all this myriad of small assets. In addition to that, the gas engines that has now been recently deployed around Ukraine, those are mostly will be used for emergency needs. So they won't be running all the time, or they won't be following the market signals. And aggregation can actually reconnect all those emergency generation, which won't be used in the day-to-day system balancing. It can actually connect it back and provide a significant boost to flexibility. So we think aggregation is paramount in helping to integrate more renewables and build a more flexible system. So our suggestions are funding research to develop industry standards and the pathways to integrate aggregation models with the TSO dispatch center, offer incentives to new entrants into the aggregation business with subsidies, grants, or interest loans, whatever it takes, support of pilot programs in collaboration with system operators to build experience and knowledge on how can be improved, and of course raise awareness among prosumers about the potential of participating in such programs can bring them. And lastly, one of the most important messages is sending in unambiguous signals to the market. to avoid underinvestment and any potential power shortages. We think that sending the mixed message of both building a decentralized system and building new nuclear baseload may hinder investment into renewables. As we saw with our modeling, introducing new nuclear capacity can actually crowd out renewable investment, and the market could look into that and decide that not so much of investment is required. So might that the whole pipeline of projects can be realized in anticipation of development of nuclear program. Additionally, the nuclear, especially subsidized by the government, may reduce capture prices for renewables, making the economics even slightly less attractive. And there is a big risk of delays in construction of nuclear reactors. No country is safe from that. And in the Ukrainian context, in most cases, most countries who develop nuclear, they've been developing it while the power demand has been growing, and there has been sufficient capacity in the system to meet the demand. While Ukraine is trying to develop new nuclear power, while it's already experiences power shortages. So any delay in the construction of nuclear may lead to prolonged energy shortages if alternative supply is not present in the system. And of course, we can also argue that nuclear power plants are actually contradicting the decentralization narrative. They are more susceptible to power attacks, to missile attacks. And on the technical side, future power systems will value flexibility over all, and baseload will be a limiting factor on how much of renewables you can actually integrate into the system. So our argument, at least if we're looking into nuclear generation, it should be 100% confirmed to have load following capabilities and to provide sufficient flexibility at a reasonable cost. So we suggest that nuclear can be friendly to a renewable system, but it has to tick all the boxes for to be a viable part of the future flexible power systems. This is all from my side. So we covered most of it. Of course, we will be sharing our findings in the report shortly after the webinar. You can read into more details of it, more into assumptions we've made, more on capacity, how we approach the capacities. You can always follow up with us via email. You can contact me, and I can share all the nitty-gritty details of the modeling with you as well. And yes, feel free to put on some questions in the chat right now.
Thank you so much for an interesting presentation, Alexei. I assume you must be already a little bit exhausted about after speaking for such a long time, but we do have a couple of already interesting questions. Before maybe I suggest that I'll be reading them out loud so that the others can hear them as well, and then you'll be, I guess you or the other participant will be answering those. But before we do that, I just wanted to remind everyone else that if you still want to post any questions, there's a Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can post your questions over there. So, okay, let's go to the first one. The first one is from Robert Carr, and the question is, what assumptions, data source did you use to parameterize the cross-border capacities with neighboring countries? What was the key parameter for you focused on here? Was there a related model constraint here?
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Robert, for the question. Sure. So the way we approach the cross-border capacities and trading is simplified at this version of the model. So we have separate lines connecting Ukrainian power system two key neighbors within the ENSOI system. And the key parameters were the capacity of each of that line. Each line was also connected to a particular node, so it's not. It also captures potential bottlenecks of transporting this power from west to the east of the country. In terms of economics of it, we did not model the power systems of the neighboring countries. So we do not model the hourly prices differential that would represent the power mix in these countries. We went with a simplified approach that all exports from Ukraine are priced at around 50 euro per megawatt hour. And all imports is priced at 150 megawatts per hour if going into the Ukraine. So that was a deliberate simplification for this model iteration, and we do plan on expanding that into a more sophisticated approach and integrating our pipes Ukraine model with the wider pipes EU model that can help us capture these more details in more granularity. In our assumptions on the capacities themselves, we started with publicly available information on imports and export capacities limited by ENSOI at this point. And we assumed as far as I remember, 2.3 gigawatts of imports available in total in 2026 and 0.8 gigawatts of export. And in 2030, we assumed 3 gigawatts in both imports and exports from in and from Ukraine.
Thank you so much. Now to the second question from Dimitri Prinus. I can see that the other questions already have lots of abbreviations, so please forgive me if I misspell something. But the question is, were there any considerations in more destruction of bigger KV TSO substations? Because new production is good and all, but if there is no sustainable grid, it's pointless.
Yes, thank you, Dimitri. That's a very valid question, and yeah, we also made a simplification in this approach. The data on generation and extent of damages is already very tricky to get, and it's not public, and it's even more it's more hard to get any data on the state of substation and lines, and I think it should be debated. So we weren't able to model the damages to the grid, and that wasn't the aim of this study. The potential of our power system model is that we can model different scenarios of grids and the extent of damages in our follow-ups, but it was really hard to come up with any scenario as of now. But this can be done in our future projects. And honestly, I will be really happy to discuss any ideas. Maybe we can come up with the viable approach to that.
Thank you so much. Now to the question, we have two questions from Roman Nitsovic, but the first one is, what are your assumptions on LCOE of new nuclear baseload, as it may vary significantly?
Thanks, Roman. First of all, hi, good to see you here. Yes, the way we model nuclear baseload is it wasn't endogenously set by the model, so it wasn't a decision of the model to build new nuclear, because with the current market level assumptions on building new nuclear around 6,000 euros per kilowatt hour, per kilowatt, the models the models choose not to build nuclear. So assumptions on LCOE do not impact the modeling itself. The way we modeled nuclear is we set it exogenously, so we predefined the capacities and we looked at how the model, the power system with such system performs. So the LCOE of nuclear itself is not produced by the model. We haven't looked into that, but the inputs in terms of costs are available in the report. You can look into that. Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Thank you. The next one is also from Roman. New RE under quota auctions will be working under FIP scheme. So could you specify what would be the anticipated impact on transmission tariff? Would GB still need it as a source of funding the scheme?
Yes, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, that was not in the scope of our report. We were focusing on the power system modeling rather than modeling the economics of the support scheme. But based on our modeling results, we can try to anticipate that the amount of subsidy that will be required. The problem is to calculate the subsidy, we would need to also know the wholesale market prices. And our model is not yet equipped to deliver prices. It can produce costs, but costs will not be representative of market prices, because in times of constraints, for example, with low supply, high demand, there will always be an uplift on top of production costs only. So that's why we haven't been looking into modeling the potential subsidy costs within this report.
Thanks, Alexei. We have two questions now from Alexander Diachuk. And the first one is, will there be demand for electricity in neighboring countries in May, when it will also be sunny and windy, so that Ukraine can export it?
Thank you, Alexander. Nice to see you too. Thank you for joining me. Valid question. As I mentioned before, we didn't model the power systems of our neighboring countries in this iteration of the report. But honestly, this is on the top list of study that I want to do as a follow-up. There's going to be the question is really valid, whether we will be even able to export the electricity during solar peaks, when we need to get rid of them from the perspective of our flexibility. So at this point, our model simplifies the export. It thinks that we can always export it if the price is right, is at 50 megawatt hours. But I'm really looking forward to develop our model and integrate it with European countries as well, so we can look into how much exactly of that export can actually be utilized if there is enough solar generation in our neighbors as well. So yes, that's going to be probably in our follow-up, and I'm looking forward to discuss the ideas and how we can integrate those.
Perfect. We have one more question from Alexander, but I think we already addressed that. And Dimitri is also pointing that out. So we won't be going through this one. I mean, to everyone else, if there's any more questions, feel free to ask them now. I think we're still kind of ahead of time. If not, then I can see Michał is raising his hand, so I'll let him maybe ask the question.
Thank you very much for the questions. Just to also shed a little bit more light on how and why do we model such not necessarily phenomena, but things we observe on a daily basis on individual power systems or about transmission between power systems, is actually quite hard to implement. So we did our best, and big thanks to Marta's team and Open Energy Transition for embedding so many policy implications in the power system. But I think the simplifications of several things, like about the transmission, about the varying prices between neighboring markets, the simplifications already at this level of the modeling exercise provide a pretty good estimate. So actually, we could spend, just to give you, just to show you how our kitchen looks like, we could spend several more months on adding features that actually don't necessarily correct, like, the big figures about meeting the demand, about renewable shares, about investments. So they are definitely helpful for managing, like, on-spot security issues or peak generation and peak demand cases, but they don't contribute, such features, if implemented, don't contribute significantly. Obviously, we are very much interested in putting those. For instance, in our recently released study about Poland's electricity demand growth beyond 2040, our modeling says Poland might be actually scarce in geospatial potential for renewables, and hence some additional baseload capacity of nuclear might be needed. But we're further exploring this option to also show how, like, remaining the technology neutrality option impacts the model and the modeling results. So many of the numbers we produce in this study or in our Polish modeling study are actually not only our, like, visionary political assumptions, these are results of the modeling. So we try to communicate them in as honest manner as possible. But feel free to ask for details.
Before I go to the next questions that are at Q&A, I saw that Alexander actually raised his hand, so I'm gonna allow him to to speak and maybe post a comment. Just give me a sec.
Yeah, hello everyone. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Hello.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much for a very, very nice study. So yeah, it's maybe not question, but some suggestion maybe for future research is what we see now in Ukraine. Alex very well know about this. That we see the people who have more or less money are installing solar panels, for example, with storages. And take into account the cost of LCOE, which Roman Nisovich mentioned today, it's maybe not it's not in line with optimization, minimization of total system cost. We also working with Times Ukraine model, and Times Ukraine model also have a function of minimization of total system cost, but. So it will be interesting how to define or how to include additional, I don't know, some parameters or something, because it's a price maybe of some self-independency or security supply for households. And we see a lot of, take into account the future increasing of electricity price for households. We will see more and more, not only solar behind matters, but also a lot of storages. So it's also interesting to include and to see how it will be changed the structure or mix, power mix. Maybe it's, I don't know, if it will have a huge impact. I guess yes, but depends on what we will focusing. If we will focus on households, it can be, but not sure until 26, but until 2030 or after 2030 it can be. So my suggestion, or if you can, because your model much more sectoral, right, and you can its results based on your model is be much better. If you will try to include some, again, security supply coefficient parameter, I don't know, something for households and for small businesses. And maybe not only small, but also for medium enterprises. It's batteries. It's one options, but second options it's we name it as unmet demand. So it's existing currently. We have a lot of small diesel or gasoline generators. It's also producing and covering demand. So it's so because maybe demand much higher, which we indicated now based on national statistic, right? So it's also could be interesting point for study based on your modeling. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Does anyone want to respond?
Sure, I will. Thanks, Alexander, for suggestions. And I remember that we discussed them over our couple of our sessions earlier in summer. We will definitely be looking into suggestions that you mentioned. Initially, we wanted to cover everything in one big report, but we decided to make some simplifications on the way and to test our model with the core functionality first. Then our plan is to build on top of these new developed functionalities on this behind the meter generation and delve more into details of how we can actually enable these emergency generators that you mentioned and that we suggested to reconnect to the system through aggregators policy-wise. And the assumption on batteries for residential and CNI systems are also a valuable idea. So I think this is going to be one of our separate studies, and I will involve you and your team in the consultations prior to that. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. So let's go back to the questions because we have some new ones. One more from Robert, who asks if we have time, and I think we still do. Could you quickly re-summarize the motivation behind having high voltage and low voltage nodes?
Yes, absolutely. So the idea was the following. One of the novelties that I didn't mention as one of the geeks stuff, but now we can have time for that. One of the key differences of our model is how we approach the demand setting. So usually the time series for demand, the hourly demand, is based on the TSO data, and we identify that TSO data includes behind the meter generation in the form of decreased demand. So basically, if you take historic data from 2020 and there are 2, 3, 5 gigawatts of behind the meter solar, if you scale it to the future, you are scaling the behind the meter generation with it without knowing how much gigawatts you're scaling. So our approach was to separate the baseline demand using the data that predates the deployment of behind the meter PV in Ukraine and use it as a baseline projection. And then all the losses of in the power system, losses in transmission network, and losses from self-consumption of power stations are determined by the model rather than being factored in this demand projections. So that's the reason number one why we decided to go into high voltage, low voltage. And the second reasoning is we put demand on the low voltage and also put behind the meter generation on the low voltage as well. So and there is a link of distribution costs that Marta presented on the slide earlier, which represents the additional economic driver for behind the meter generation. In our future approaches to the model, we plan to work in more details on that and try to optimize low voltage prosumer decision making based on top system costs from their perspective, which considers both everything that goes from transmission plus distribution costs, and then optimize the whole system with it. So the reasoning was so we can implement the prosumer generation in more details, and also it's a foundation stone to a more granular model that can capture not only electricity components but also other elements that PIPESA framework enables, such as modeling heat demand and other components.
Thanks, Alexei. We have one more question from Kian. And the question is, why can't hydrogen be an option for storage of the curtailed electricity generation? Electrolyzer / fuel cell pair can provide a backup option.
Yes, thanks for the question, Kian. Yeah, our idea was to look into really short midterm perspective. We don't anticipate any hydrogen technologies being deployed in Ukraine in this time frame. So that was a deliberate simplification. And to be honest, no hydrogen-based solutions are cost efficient at this point. So even if we put it into the model and ask how much of this system you would suggest, it will also always prefer other systems that have low costs. So that was the approach we picked for this model. Hydrogen would make more sense if we will be looking into longer perspective, up to beyond 2040 at least. But that's a question for our future researchers.
If I can also comment on this, we had a very long discussion about, why are we so bearish about hydrogen ramp up in general, Polish or European power system? And I think it's simply reasonable to assume it's a very important technology. It's existing in the fertilizers and petrochemical business, but in energy sector, especially in energy storage, the technology readiness level, purely technical wise or market wise, it's still a novelty. So it would be simply too optimistic on our side to say, hey, we can quickly ramp this up. The technology that obviously is of higher maturity on the market is a usual battery storage, right? So if we extend in the future our modeling scenarios for Ukraine, we'll definitely look into the options and see what the model would suggest on the Ukrainian power market, because the results might be actually different from what we've been saying on the Polish market, where the model says, hey, it's actually not so market relevant until late 30s, maybe in the 40s. So I can't promise what will be the result, but we have to be cautious on that. Maybe Marta has a comment from also modeling other markets with hydrogen as storage option.
Yeah, also here we have to consider very high conversion losses for hydrogen. So if we had like behind the meter wind turbines, it would make maybe some sense, but we didn't model that, and it's also not a technology. So like if you model solar, then having behind the meter hydrogen fuel cells is probably also not economic, just because of the high conversion losses and the daily fluctuations. So hydrogen is typically for a longer duration storage, up to multiple weeks, whereas battery is fluctuating for the day variations. So batteries make a lot more sense. And even those are not very much built in the model. So just supporting Alexei's basically opinion, like the model wouldn't build that.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, we don't have any more questions. My question to the speakers is whether you have any last comments before I wrap it up. I don't see those. Okay, then first of all, I would like to say thank you to our attendees for listening to our webinar. The recording of this webinar is going to be available at our YouTube channel, which you can find in chat. There's a link to Instrat's YouTube channel over there. When it comes to the report itself, we're going to be publishing it today at Instrat's website as well. You can find the link in chat also. And finally, I will be sending it to the attendees directly via email also today, so you will receive it individually. And last but not least, thank you to our great speakers for presenting the findings today. And yeah, thank you all for participating, and we'll put a stop to it right now. Thank you so much. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.